Look at a structure built over 2,000 years ago, a monument that has survived not just the slow erosion of time, but the violent, sudden chaos of countless earthquakes. It stands today, silent and majestic, a testament to a profound mystery. How was this possible? There were no steel beams, no computer models, no reinforced concrete. The builders had only their hands, simple tools, and something we often underestimate, a deep, intuitive connection to the world around them. This is the incredible story of how ancient cultures engineered seismic-resistant monuments, creating buildings that could dance with the earth itself. It's a story that challenges everything we think we know about so-called primitive technology and reveals a legacy of genius written in stone. We are about to embark on a journey across continents and through centuries, from the zigzagging walls of Inca fortresses in the high Andes to the swaying wooden pagodas of Japan. We will walk through the grand plazas of Mesoamerica and stand in the shadow of Greek temples, uncovering the hidden principles that allowed these places to defy the immense power of seismic forces. The secrets we will uncover are not just historical curiosities, they are insights that still captivate and inform modern engineers and historians. Our ancestors possessed a sophisticated understanding of physics, materials, and geometry, knowledge gained not from textbooks, but from generations of watching how trees bend in a storm, how water flows around rocks, and how the very ground beneath their feet could move. Prepare to have your perspective shifted. The wisdom embedded in these ancient structures opens a window into a lost world of innovation, where observation and ingenuity triumphed over a lack of technology. This is more than an architectural history lesson. It is a rediscovery of a forgotten relationship with nature, one where humanity built in harmony with the planet's forces, not in defiance of them. So settle in and open your mind to the possibilities, because what you are about to learn will change the way you look at every ancient ruin, and perhaps even the world around you today. Long before there were instruments to measure the Earth's tremors, there were people watching, learning, and remembering. Picture a village elder centuries ago, standing at the edge of a forest as a powerful storm rolls through. He sees the younger, more flexible trees bending almost to the ground, their branches whipping in the wind, yet when the storm passes, they spring back unharmed. Just a few feet away, an old, rigid tree, stubborn and unyielding, has snapped in two. This was not just a passing observation, it was a fundamental lesson in physics, written in the language of nature. The principle was clear: to survive a great force, one must be able to move with it, not stand rigidly against it. This simple, powerful truth became the bedrock of ancient seismic wisdom. Without a single sheet of engineering paper, these early observers began to codify the laws of structural survival, laws they saw enacted every day in the world around them. Their laboratory was the entire natural world. They noticed how certain animals behaved strangely before the ground shook, and they learned to read those signs as early warnings. They studied the lay of the land, understanding that a ridge of solid bedrock was a far safer place to build than a soft, sandy river plain that could turn to liquid in a quake. They observed the patterns in how rocks fractured along fault lines, and saw how deep-rooted plants held slopes together while shallow-rooted ones gave way. Every landslide, every cracked boulder, every resilient patch of bamboo was a data point in a vast, collective, and unwritten encyclopedia of geotechnical knowledge. This was not magic or superstition. It was rigorous empirical science built on generations of careful observation and passed down experience. They learned to listen to the earth, and the earth, in turn, taught them how to build upon it. This deep, intuitive connection led to the first great architectural breakthrough, the idea that a building should not be a rigid, monolithic object, but a dynamic system that could interact with seismic forces. Instead of trying to resist the incredible power of an earthquake, a fight they knew they could never win, they designed their structures to accommodate the movement, to sway and shift and dissipate that energy harmlessly. They were, in essence, teaching stone and wood to dance, by mimicking the flexibility of a sapling or the way a stream of water flows around an obstacle. They created an architecture of resilience. This foundational philosophy, born from watching trees in the wind, would eventually manifest in the incredible monuments we still marvel at today, setting the stage for every ingenious technique we are about to explore. Now, let's translate that foundational wisdom into a tangible, groundbreaking principle. Think of the very base of a building, the point where stone meets soil. In a rigid structure, an earthquake's energy travels directly upward, shaking the building apart from the bottom up. Ancient engineers devised a brilliantly simple way to break this deadly connection. Imagine a massive stone block, perhaps weighing several tons, being carefully lowered not onto solid bedrock, but onto a prepared layer of sand, smooth river stones, or even a type of gravel. When the ground suddenly lurches, this entire foundation layer moves, but the building above it, sitting on this unstable bed, is able to slide and shift independently. It decouples from the violent motion of the earth. This is the essence of base isolation, a concept so advanced that it's a cornerstone of modern seismic engineering. Yet it was being practiced thousands of years ago with nothing but empirical knowledge and careful observation. We see this principle in action with stunning clarity in the monuments of the Inca Empire. In Peru, archaeologists have examined the foundations of certain Inca walls and discovered that they were intentionally built on deep beds of rounded gravel. This wasn't just a convenient building material, it was a designed system. During a tremor, these countless small stones would roll and shift against each other, absorbing and dissipating the seismic energy as friction and movement. The destructive waves that would normally tear a rigid wall to pieces were instead converted into a gentle, rocking motion. The wall itself could sway slightly on its gravel mattress, effectively riding out the earthquake rather than fighting it. This transformed the foundation from a rigid anchor into a dynamic shock absorber, a buffer zone that protected the delicate structure above. Across the Pacific, in the seismically active islands of Japan, ancient builders arrived at a remarkably similar solution, though expressed through their own unique materials and methods. Traditional Japanese structures, from storehouses to temples, were often erected on layered stone foundations. These weren't monolithic slabs, they were carefully assembled platforms of stone, often with smooth, flat surfaces placed on top of one another. The genius of this design lay in the interfaces between these stones. When the ground shook, these stone layers could slide minutely against each other. This sliding action created friction, which consumed a tremendous amount of the earthquake's energy before it could ever reach the wooden frame of the building above. It was a form of passive energy dissipation, a way of letting the foundation itself absorb the punch, leaving only a weakened tremor to travel upward. This principle of allowing controlled, intentional movement was nothing short of revolutionary. It represents a profound philosophical shift from resistance to accommodation. Modern engineering defines a building's fundamental period, the rate at which it naturally sways. Base isolation works by dramatically lengthening this period, making the building sway much slower and out of sync with the rapid, jerky frequencies of most earthquake ground motions. While ancient builders didn't have the mathematics to calculate these periods, their intuitive grasp of the concept was perfect. they understood that by introducing a flexible layer at the base, they were changing the very nature of the building's interaction with the Earth. They were creating a structure that was, in a very real sense, a partner to the seismic event, moving with a purpose that ensured its own survival. This was physics in action, understood not through equations, but through a deep, generational dialogue with a volatile planet. Now let's move from the ground up and examine the very fabric of these ancient walls. Picture yourself running your hand over the stones of Machu Picchu. You're not feeling a flat, uniform surface, but a complex tapestry of irregular polygons, each one uniquely shaped, each locking perfectly into its neighbors without a trace of mortar. This famous joinery is so precise that, as the saying goes, not even a blade of grass can find its way between them. But this was about far more than just showcasing incredible craftsmanship or creating a visually striking pattern. This was a highly sophisticated seismic defense system. In an earthquake, a rigid, mortared wall acts like a single, brittle unit. When the ground moves, the entire structure is forced to move as one, and the stress concentrates at the weakest points, leading to catastrophic cracks and collapse. The Inca polygonal masonry, however, created a dynamic, flexible assembly. Each of those intricately shaped stones was an individual component in a massive, three-dimensional stone puzzle. When seismic waves hit, the entire wall could micro-shift. The stones would grind and settle against one another, their complex, often slightly convex, faces ensuring they could never slide completely apart. This intricate dance of countless individual blocks absorbed and dissipated the earthquake's energy as friction and tiny movements all along the network of joints, effectively preventing any single destructive force from tearing the structure down. This principle of interlocking construction wasn't unique to the Andes. Across the globe in ancient Greece, builders were employing a remarkably similar technique known as lesbian or polygonal masonry. The Acropolis walls at sites like Delphi are stunning examples, where massive, irregularly shaped limestone blocks were painstakingly fitted together. Like their Inca counterparts half a world away, the Greek builders understood that a wall built without rigid mortar could move and settle without failing. The joints between these stones acted as natural expansion joints, allowing the entire structure to flex and breathe with the Earth's movements. The energy from a tremor would be redirected and redistributed along countless interlocking seams, traveling through the wall in a dispersed, non-destructive manner rather than focusing on a single fault line. It was a brilliant, passive form of damping, built directly into the fabric of the wall itself. The parallel development of this technique in two completely unconnected cultures points to a universal truth discovered through observation. Flexibility, even in something as seemingly rigid as stone, is the key to survival. The true genius of this masonry goes even deeper than the visible surface. The builders often employed a technique where the stones were slightly tapered inward from the front face to the back. This meant that the interlocking wasn't just two-dimensional. It was a complex, three-dimensional weave that created incredible internal stability. Furthermore, the process of construction itself contributed to the seismic resilience. As the walls settled over time under their own immense weight and through minor tremors, the stones would find their most stable, optimized positions. This natural settling process essentially pre-stressed the entire assembly, creating a cohesive mass that was perfectly balanced to handle future ground movements. The wall became a single, unified entity, yet one composed of countless independent parts capable of minute individual adjustments. It's a concept that modern engineering struggles to replicate with synthetic materials, a testament to the profound understanding of material behavior and structural physics achieved by these ancient masters. who transformed simple stone into a dynamic, lifelike structure that could withstand the test of time and tectonics. Building on the brilliant concept of allowing movement at the foundations and within the walls themselves, we come to a third, equally vital principle: the ancient mastery of materials. This wasn't simply about using what was readily available. It was a profound, strategic selection of resources that possessed exactly the right properties for survival. Ancient engineers understood that different materials behaved in profoundly different ways under stress. They learned through observation and painful experience that a rigid material, while strong, could be brittle and unforgiving, while a more flexible one could absorb incredible punishment and simply bounce back. This led them to favor materials like specific types of timber, bamboo, and even certain stones that had a natural, built-in elasticity, allowing their structures to behave more like living organisms than inert piles of rock and wood. One of the most breathtaking examples of this material wisdom comes from ancient China with the invention of the Dugong bracket system. Picture a complex network of interlocking wooden brackets, stacked like a series of inverted pyramids between the top of a column and the heavy roof beams above. These were not nailed or glued, they were meticulously carved to fit together using only complex joinery. The genius of the Dugong lies in its dynamic response. During an earthquake, as the building sways, these wooden brackets compress and decompress. They act like a series of incredibly sophisticated shock absorbers, flexing at the joints and absorbing the violent energy of the seismic waves. The entire wooden frame of the building becomes a flexible skeleton, swaying in a coordinated, harmonious dance that dissipates force through the friction and slight deformation of countless wooden parts. This system is so effective that it has allowed wooden pagodas like the one at Horyuji in Japan, which drew heavily from Chinese techniques, to stand for over 1,400 years in a region plagued by constant tremors. The wood itself, with its natural grain and fibrous structure, provides the perfect balance of strength and give, a property that ancient builders learned to harness to perfection. This philosophy of enhancing a material's natural properties extended far beyond wood. In the arid climates of the Middle East and North Africa, where timber was often scarce, builders turned to earth itself. But they didn't just use plain mud bricks. Through generations of experimentation, they discovered that by mixing straw, reeds, or even animal hair into the wet clay, they could transform a brittle, sun-dried brick into a remarkably resilient building block. The straw fibers acted like a natural reinforcement, much like the steel rebar we use in modern concrete. When a mud brick wall faced seismic stress, these tiny fibers would hold the crumbling matrix together, providing crucial tensile strength. They allowed the brick to flex and deform slightly without catastrophically shattering. This simple yet revolutionary composite material created walls that could crack in a controlled way, often in a web of fine hairline fractures, rather than collapsing into a heap of dust and rubble. This was material science at its most fundamental and effective, a perfect example of innovation born from necessity and a deep understanding of local resources. The selection process for stone was equally deliberate. While we often think of stone as the ultimate rigid material, ancient builders knew that not all stone is created equal. Some types of limestone and sandstone have a degree of natural porosity and a crystalline structure that allows for microscopic flexibility. They selected these more forgiving stones for critical components, avoiding harder but more brittle types like flint or certain granites for large, load-bearing walls. In some cases, they even employed a technique of seasoning their stone, leaving freshly quarried blocks exposed to the elements for years, even decades. This process allowed the stone to undergo natural cycles of wetting and drying, heating and cooling, which could help relieve internal stresses and stabilize its structure, making it less likely to fracture suddenly under the immense, unpredictable loads of an earthquake. Every single choice, from the species of tree to the specific quarry, was a calculated decision informed by a deep, generational knowledge base. It was this meticulous, strategic use of materials that gave these ancient structures their legendary resilience, proving that sometimes the most advanced technology is not about creating new substances, but about understanding the hidden potential in the ones nature has already provided. But the ingenuity of ancient builders went even further, moving beyond flexible foundations and interlocking walls to incorporate what we would now call active damping systems directly into their architectural designs. One of the most breathtaking examples of this is found in the iconic wooden pagodas of Japan, structures that seem to defy physics as they gracefully sway during some of the most powerful earthquakes on Earth. The secret lies deep within the building in a feature known as the Shinbashira. This is a massive central pillar, but unlike a typical support column, it is not firmly anchored into the ground. Instead, it hangs like a giant chandelier, suspended by chains or beams from the very top of the pagoda. During an earthquake, the flexible wooden frame of the building begins to oscillate back and forth. Meanwhile, this heavy, suspended central pillar acts like an enormous pendulum, naturally swinging in the opposite direction to the building's sway. This creates a powerful counteracting force that actively dampens the oscillations, effectively stabilizing the entire structure. It's a concept remarkably similar to the tuned mass dampers used in modern skyscrapers today, where a massive block of concrete is mounted high in the building and moves on a lubricated plate to cancel out sway. The ancient Japanese carpenters achieved this same effect with wood and intuition, creating a passive system that requires no power or computers, only a profound understanding of dynamics and balance. This principle of using internal components to absorb and dissipate energy was applied in other clever ways across the ancient world. In some parts of the Mediterranean and the Middle East, builders would intentionally leave cavities within their stone walls or fill them with a core of loose rubble and earth. At first glance, this might seem like a shortcut or a way to save on materials, but it was a deliberate seismic strategy. When an earthquake struck, these loose internal elements would shift and grind against each other within the confines of the outer stone shells. This created immense amounts of internal friction, which effectively converted the destructive kinetic energy of the seismic waves into harmless heat and sound energy. The wall itself became a sort of shock absorber, its very heart designed to churn and dissipate force. Similarly, the layered, stacked design of pagoda roofs or the construction of corbelled arches in Mayan buildings allowed different sections of the structure to move semi-independently. Instead of the entire building being forced to move as one rigid unit, these segmented elements could shift and settle against one another, again creating friction at the joints that robbed the earthquake of its destructive potential. What is perhaps most remarkable about these ancient damping mechanisms is how seamlessly they were woven into the overall aesthetic and spiritual purpose of the structures. The Shinbashira in a Japanese pagoda isn't an ugly, added-on piece of engineering. It is a central, often sacred, element of the building's design. The cavities in walls were hidden from view, their functional genius known only to the builders. This represents a holistic philosophy of architecture where form and function were not just united, but were two expressions of the same underlying principle: harmony with natural forces. The builders weren't just trying to prevent collapse, they were creating structures that could move in rhythm with the earth, that could absorb its violent impulses and transform them into a safe, graceful dance. This approach stands in stark contrast to some modern methods that often bolt on unsightly reinforcements. The ancient way was one of integration, proving that the most resilient design is often the one that works with the laws of nature, not against them, and does so with an elegance that has allowed these monuments to endure for centuries. Now, let's turn our attention from the dynamic flexibility of materials to the silent, powerful language of geometry. There is a profound stability inherent in certain shapes, a mathematical truth that ancient builders grasped with stunning clarity. Picture the iconic form of a pyramid, rising from the desert floor with its four perfect triangular faces meeting at a single point. Its immense weight is not just piled high, it is distributed with incredible precision, pushing down and outward in a perfectly balanced manner. The center of gravity in such a structure is remarkably low and centered, making it exceptionally resistant to being toppled by lateral forces, exactly the kind of push and pull an earthquake delivers. This wasn't an aesthetic accident. It was the result of a deep, intuitive understanding that the form of a building could be its first and most effective line of defense against the chaos of seismic shaking. This geometric wisdom extended far beyond the simple pyramid. Across the ancient world, engineers discovered that certain shapes possessed innate structural advantages. The triangle, for instance, is the only rigid polygon. It cannot be deformed without changing the length of its sides. This principle of triangulation became a hidden force in many structures, from the trusses in Greek temples to the corbelled arches of Mayan vaults. Hexagons and concentric circles also appeared repeatedly in sacred and defensive architecture. A hexagonal tower, for example, presents multiple planes of resistance to seismic waves from any direction, while a circular structure, like a silo or a tholos tomb, has no weak corners where stress can concentrate. By choosing these resilient forms, ancient architects ensured that when the ground shook, the forces would be channeled smoothly around the structure, following the predetermined paths of its geometry, rather than finding a single weak point to exploit and rupture. The application of this principle went far deeper than the overall silhouette of a building. It was embedded in the very distribution of weight and mass within the structure. Ancient engineers were masters of balance. They carefully calculated the placement of heavy elements like thick support columns, massive lintels, and stone roofs, aligning them along stable central axes. This meticulous balancing act minimized what modern engineers call torsional effects. Imagine trying to twist a perfectly centered, symmetrical object. It's incredibly difficult. But if the weight is off-center, even slightly, a twisting force can easily rip it apart. During an earthquake, this twisting is a primary cause of collapse. By ensuring their buildings were symmetrically loaded, ancient builders eliminated this vulnerability. The seismic energy would push and pull evenly, causing the structure to shake in a more predictable, piston-like motion rather than a destructive, wrenching spiral. We can see this brilliant synthesis of form and function in structures like the Roman Pantheon. Its massive, hemispherical dome is a masterpiece of weight distribution. The concrete was poured in layers, with progressively lighter and more porous aggregates used as the dome rose higher, effectively reducing the weight at the top. The thick base of the drum and the step rings or coffers on the interior not only added beauty but also acted as stiffening rings, channeling the immense gravitational and lateral forces safely down to the ground. Even the single, central oculus at the apex serves a structural purpose, relieving stress at the most critical point. Every element was part of a cohesive geometric and physical system designed for ultimate stability. This ancient focus on proportion and balance created monuments that were not merely strong, but intelligently strong, their forms speaking a language of resilience that has endured for millennia. proving that sometimes the most powerful engineering solution is written in the timeless equations of shape and symmetry. To truly grasp the genius of these principles in action, we must journey high into the Andes to the citadel of Sacsayhuamán, overlooking the Inca capital of Cusco. Here, you don't just see ancient walls, you experience them. You stand before colossal, zigzagging ramparts composed of limestone blocks so immense that their very presence seems to defy logic, some weighing as much as 200 tons. The sheer scale is humbling, but the real marvel is in the form. The walls do not run in straight lines. They weave back and forth in a dramatic, serrated pattern that cuts across the landscape. For centuries, this design was primarily admired for its formidable defensive qualities, presenting a daunting, multi-angled barrier to any potential attacker. Yet its most profound purpose was hidden, a secret defense not against human armies, but against the far more unpredictable and powerful forces of the Earth itself. This zigzag configuration was a masterclass in seismic engineering. The geometry of the zigzag is key to understanding its resilience. When a seismic wave, a powerful pulse of energy, travels through the ground and strikes a long, straight wall, it impacts the entire length almost simultaneously. The wall is forced to absorb this massive, unified shock, often leading to a single, catastrophic failure. But at Sacsayhuamán, the story is entirely different. As a seismic wave approaches, it doesn't encounter one continuous plane. Instead, it meets a series of projecting angles and recessed corners. Each sharp turn in the wall acts as a separate, individual plane of resistance. The energy of the quake is forced to break up, fragmenting as it travels along the zigzag path. A portion of the wave's force is reflected away at one angle, while another portion is redirected laterally, channeled along the length of the wall segment and dissipated as friction between the massive stones. This process repeats at every single corner, systematically robbing the earthquake of its destructive power by forcing it to constantly change direction and disperse its energy across dozens of smaller, manageable segments. The wall, in essence, acts like a sophisticated comb, breaking the monolithic force of the seismic wave into harmless, dispersed strands. This brilliant design was enhanced by another critical feature, the inward slope of the walls. If you look closely, you'll see that these colossal ramparts are not perfectly vertical. They lean slightly inward, a subtle but calculated tilt. This design creates a structure whose center of gravity is low and deeply rooted. When subjected to the violent lateral shaking of an earthquake, this inward inclination works to the structure's supreme advantage. Instead of being pushed outward and toppling over, the forces actually drive the massive blocks inward, making the entire assembly settle more tightly into itself. Under the immense stress of a tremor, the wall becomes dynamically more compact and stable. It's a concept similar to a wedge being driven more securely into place. The very force that seeks to destroy it instead reinforces its cohesion. This combination of the zigzag's energy-dispersing geometry and the inward slope's self-stabilizing mass created a defensive system that was virtually unbeatable by natural forces. The Inca's mastery extended far above ground, beginning with their profound understanding of the ground itself. Before a single stone was quarried, their engineers conducted what we would now call a thorough geotechnical survey. They chose the site of Sacsayhuamán not just for its strategic view, but because it was anchored directly onto a massive outcrop of stable bedrock. By building directly on this solid foundation, they bypassed the danger of unstable topsoil or sublayers that could liquefy during an earthquake, a phenomenon that has doomed countless modern structures. Their connection to the topography was absolute. They read the land like a map, ensuring their greatest monuments were fused with the most stable parts of the Earth's crust. Finally, we return to the stones themselves, the culmination of this entire system. The fabled precision of Inca stone cutting was the final, crucial element in creating an earthquake-proof structure. Each of these gigantic blocks was painstakingly shaped using harder stone tools and abrasive sand to create complex, multifaceted faces. When set in place, they fit together so perfectly that the joints were not just tight, they were complex three-dimensional puzzles. This was not done for aesthetic vanity. In an earthquake, this perfection allowed for what engineers call micro-slip. As the ground moved, the stones were not locked rigidly together. They could minutely shift, grind, and settle against one another within a range of perhaps only a millimeter or two. This tiny, controlled movement across thousands of joints absorbed a staggering amount of seismic energy, transforming it into harmless heat and sound through friction. The walls would literally tremble and readjust as a single, living entity, then settle back into a state of perfect equilibrium once the tremor passed. Sacsayhuamán stands today not merely as a ruined fortress, but as a timeless lesson in integrated design, where every element from the bedrock below to the dizzying angles above worked in harmonious concert to defy the ages. Now let's cross the Pacific to a land where the Earth rarely stays still, and discover an architectural solution that seems to defy everything we think we know about stability. Picture a traditional Japanese pagoda, a graceful tower that seems to reach for the sky with its elegantly curved, layered roofs. In a country shaken by thousands of tremors every year, these wooden structures have stood for centuries, some for over a millennium, while modern concrete buildings around them have crumbled. Their secret isn't found in a rigid, unyielding frame, but in a philosophy of controlled, graceful movement. They are designed not to resist an earthquake's force, but to accept it, to sway with it, and in doing so, to neutralize its destructive potential. The heart of this brilliant system is a single, deceptively simple element known as the Shinbashira. Step inside the dim, fragrant interior of one of these ancient pagodas and look straight up. You'll see a massive central pillar, the Shinbashira, running right through the core of the building. But if you were to dig down at its base, you would make a startling discovery. This colossal pillar, often a single, enormous tree trunk, is not firmly anchored into the ground. In many of the most resilient pagodas, it doesn't even touch the earth. It's a hanging column, suspended from the very apex of the structure, dangling freely like a giant pendulum within the pagoda's wooden skeleton. This is the complete opposite of conventional wisdom, which tells us that a central support should be the most rooted part of a building. Here, the Shinbashira is designed to be independent, a free swinging counterweight at the very heart of the tower. When an earthquake strikes, the pagoda's flexible wooden frame, built with complex joinery that allows for movement, begins to sway back and forth. It's a frightening sight, with the entire multi-story structure leaning several feet in each direction. But as the building sways one way, the heavy, suspended Shinbashira naturally swings in the opposite direction, pulled by its own inertia. This creates a powerful, counteracting force that actively dampens the building's oscillations. It's a perfect physical demonstration of Newton's third law of motion. For every action, there is an equal and opposite reaction, though it was perfected by Japanese master carpenters centuries before the law was ever formally written down. This Shinbashira system functions exactly like a giant tuned mass damper, the same technology used in modern skyscrapers like the Taipei 101 Tower, where a colossal steel ball pendulum sits near the top to cancel out sway caused by wind and earthquakes. The ancient pagoda achieves this same dynamic stabilization using nothing but wood, gravity, and profound intuition. This central pendulum is only one part of a multi-layered defense system. The pagoda's iconic silhouette, with its series of stacked, upwardly shrinking roofs, is also a key component of its seismic resilience. Contrary to how it might appear from the outside, these roofs are not part of a single, continuous structure. They are constructed as a set of individual, stacked boxes, each with its own independent framework of pillars and beams. These boxes are stacked one on top of the other, connected by complex, interlocking joints that transfer the weight downwards but are not completely rigid. During an earthquake, this design allows each roof level to shift and sway slightly out of sync with the ones above and below it. This independent movement creates friction at the joints between the stacked boxes, which absorbs and dissipates a tremendous amount of the seismic energy. The earthquake's force is not transferred cleanly from the bottom to the top. Instead, it's broken up and consumed by the rhythmic, slightly chaotic dance of the individual layers. The building essentially shakes itself apart, but only in a microscopic, controlled way that prevents it from ever shaking itself to pieces. This architectural marvel is the result of centuries of relentless refinement in one of the most seismically active laboratories on Earth. Master carpenters, known as Mia Deku, honed their skills over generations, passing down their knowledge not through complex mathematical formulas, but through oral tradition, hands-on apprenticeship, and meticulously guarded scrolls of secret joinery techniques. They learned through observation which wood species, like cypress and cedar, offered the best combination of strength and flexibility. They developed joinery so precise that it could hold a structure together for 1,000 years without a single metal nail, yet still allow for the minute movements essential for survival. The survival of pagodas like the one at Horyu-Jai, built in the 7th century, is not a matter of luck. It is living proof of a design philosophy that embraced flexibility over rigidity and dynamic response over brute strength. These structures do not fight the Earth's power. They converse with it, swaying in a silent, ancient dialogue that has ensured their place on the landscape long after countless more advanced buildings have turned to dust. Now, let's turn our gaze from the wooden pagodas of Japan to the sun-bleached marble of the Acropolis, to one of the most iconic structures in human history, the Parthenon. At first glance, it appears as the very definition of rigid, perfect geometry, but look closer and you'll see that its perfection is an illusion, a brilliant and intentional one. The ancient Greek architects, led by Ictinos and Callicrates under the guidance of the sculptor Phidias, understood something profound about perception and physics. They knew that perfectly straight lines could deceive the eye and, more importantly, could create a vulnerable structure. So, they introduced a series of subtle, almost imperceptible curves and inclinations across the entire temple. These were not artistic whims. They were calculated seismic innovations designed to make the building behave as a cohesive, resilient unit when the Earth began to shake. Take a moment to study the columns. They don't stand perfectly straight and uniform. If you could run your hand along one, you'd feel a gentle swell in the middle, a subtle bulging known as intosses. And if you could extend all the columns upward, they wouldn't stand parallel. They would converge, leaning slightly inward toward a point high above the temple. This combination of intosses and inward tilt is a masterstroke of engineering. In a powerful earthquake, a structure is subjected to violent lateral forces that try to push it over. A building with perfectly straight, vertical columns would be far more likely to simply collapse at the joints, its rigid elements snapping under the stress. But the Parthenon's columns, with their gentle curves and inward lean, create a structure that wants to compress under load. When the ground shakes, the forces are channeled downward, driving the columns more firmly into their bases and causing the entire structure to settle into itself, becoming dynamically more stable. It's a system that resists overturning by using the earthquake's own energy to reinforce the building's integrity, a concept of active stability that modern engineers still admire. This brilliance extends to the very joints that hold the massive marble blocks together. The Greeks used a sophisticated system of metal connectors, primarily bronze clamps and dowels. These weren't meant to weld the stones into a single, unyielding mass. On the contrary, their design allowed for a controlled degree of movement. The clamps, often shaped like double-ended hooks, were set in carved channels and poured with molten lead. The resulting connection was strong enough to hold the blocks in place, yet the lead and bronze had enough give to allow for microscopic shifts and rotations at the joints during a seismic event. This flexibility was crucial. It prevented stress from concentrating at a single point, allowing the energy to be distributed and dissipated throughout the entire lattice of stone. The building could breathe and adjust during a tremor, its individual parts moving minutely against each other without losing their collective strength. It was a system that acknowledged the dynamic nature of the earth and created a structure that could respond in kind. Of course, even the most brilliantly designed building is doomed if it stands on unstable ground. The Greek understanding of this principle was just as advanced as their architectural genius. They practiced a form of intuitive geotechnical engineering, carefully selecting the sites for their most important temples. The Acropolis itself is not a random hill. It is a massive outcrop of limestone bedrock, one of the most stable geological foundations available. By building directly on this solid, unyielding base, the Greek engineers completely avoided the danger of liquefaction, a phenomenon where water saturated soil, particularly in alluvial plains near rivers or coasts, can temporarily lose all its strength and behave like a liquid during an earthquake, swallowing anything built upon it. Their choice of site was a deliberate risk mitigation strategy, ensuring that the ground would not betray their efforts before the seismic waves even reached the structure. All of these elements, the curving columns, the flexible metal joints, the strategic site selection, culminate in a philosophy that is perhaps the Greeks' greatest gift to engineering: the seamless integration of art and science. In the Parthenon, there is no distinction between what is beautiful and what is functional. The aesthetic refinements are the seismic reinforcements. The mathematical proportions that grant the temple its timeless grace are the same ones that distribute weight with optimal efficiency. This holistic approach created more than just a building. It created a resilient entity, a monument designed not merely to exist but to endure. The Parthenon has survived for 2,500 years, through wars, explosions, and countless earthquakes, not by accident, but because its creators possessed a profound wisdom. They built for the ages, understanding that true longevity comes from designing in harmony with the immutable laws of nature and physics, a lesson that resonates as powerfully today as it did on the Athenian hill so long ago. Leaving the classical world behind, we now journey to the heart of Mesoamerica, where entire cities were engineered as monuments to celestial and terrestrial harmony. As you begin your ascent of the Pyramid of the Sun at Teotihuacan, the sheer scale of the structure is overwhelming, but the true genius lies not just in its height, but in the specific rhythm of its facade. Your eyes trace the repeating pattern of the Talud-Tablero architecture, a sloping base or talud, supporting a vertical, panel-like section, the tablero. This alternating pattern is far more than a decorative motif. It is a sophisticated seismic defense system. Each sloping section acts as a buttress, pushing the weight of the pyramid inward and downward, creating a tremendously stable, low center of gravity. The vertical panels, meanwhile, break up the surface into smaller, individual elements, When an earthquake strikes, this stepped profile prevents the entire structure from swaying as one massive, vulnerable block. Instead, the seismic waves are fractured and dispersed as they travel up the irregular surface, losing their destructive coherence with every alternating slope and vertical face they encounter. This design essentially creates a cascade of mini-collisions that absorb and dissipate energy, transforming a single, powerful shock into a series of harmless, scattered tremors by the time they reach the summit. But the resilience of this pyramid is not only skin-deep. If we could peer inside its massive bulk, we would find a construction technique that brilliantly balances weight and flexibility. The core of the Pyramid of the Sun is not made of solid, perfectly fitted stone. Instead, the builders created a vast, internal rubble core, a carefully contained mountain of loose volcanic rock, gravel, and earth. This core was then encased in an external shell of precisely cut stone veneers and a thick layer of plaster. This combination is masterful. The internal rubble core is not rigid. During a tremor, the countless pieces of stone within can shift and settle minutely against one another, creating immense internal friction that consumes seismic energy. Yet, the rigid external shell binds this shifting core together, forcing it to behave as a single, monolithic unit. The structure gets the best of both worlds, the energy-dissipating quality of a non-rigid interior, combined with the strong, cohesive strength of a solid exterior. It's a concept similar to a beanbag inside a sturdy box. The contents can move and absorb impact, but the overall shape remains intact. This method allowed the pyramid to withstand the test of time and tectonics in a region known for its volcanic and seismic activity. Hundreds of miles to the north, at Chichen Itza, the Maya developed their own breathtaking seismic innovations, epitomized by the majestic pyramid known as El Castillo. Its design showcases a multi-layered approach to resilience. One of its most fascinating features involves an acoustic phenomenon. When you stand at the base of the grand staircase and clap your hands, the sound echoes back as a distorted chirp, reminiscent of the sacred Quetzal bird. While its spiritual significance is profound, this acoustic effect is a clue to the pyramid's physical properties. The sound waves are being broken up and altered as they travel across the stepped, jagged surface of the structure. This same principle would apply to seismic waves. The complex geometry of the staircase and terraces acts as a natural frequency damper, scattering and disrupting the low-frequency waves of an earthquake, preventing them from building up a resonant frequency that could shake the pyramid apart. The very form that creates the sacred sound also helps to defend the structure from the Earth's rumble. Furthermore, the pyramid's precise orientation is another key to its longevity. El Castillo is aligned with such astronomical accuracy that during the equinoxes, the setting sun creates a play of light and shadow resembling a serpent slithering down the staircase. This celestial alignment was not just for ceremonial purposes. The builders likely understood that by aligning the pyramid's corners with the cardinal directions, they were presenting a symmetrical face to the prevailing forces of nature, including the powerful winds that sweep across the Yucatan plain. A square, symmetrically oriented structure is far less vulnerable to being twisted or torn apart by lateral forces than an irregular or misaligned one. By minimizing its vulnerability to wind, which can exert similar stresses to minor tremors, the builders effectively reduced the cumulative wear and tear on the joints and foundations, preserving its structural integrity for the much rarer but far more powerful seismic event. Perhaps the most powerful lesson from these Mesoamerican cultures is not found in a single structure, but in the archaeological layers beneath them. Both the Teotihuacanos and the Maya practiced a philosophy of continuous, iterative improvement. When a temple or pyramid was damaged or collapsed, often due to an earthquake, They did not simply abandon it or rebuild it exactly the same way. They saw it as a learning opportunity. Archaeologists have uncovered evidence of multiple construction phases at these sites, with each new layer incorporating design changes informed by the failures of the previous one. A wall that fell outward might be rebuilt with a more pronounced inward slope. A foundation that settled unevenly might be deepened or widened in the next iteration. This process of learning from collapse embodies a truly empirical engineering approach. It was a slow, generational refinement, a conversation with the land itself, where the Earth's violent feedback was carefully studied and used to create an ever more resilient architecture. This willingness to learn from failure, to treat each disaster as a harsh but invaluable teacher, is a timeless principle that echoes the very spirit of innovation, proving that the greatest monuments are often built upon the lessons of their own ruins. While we often look skyward to marvel at ancient engineering, some of the most profound seismic secrets are found by looking down, by descending into the Earth itself. Journey with me now into the heart of the Indian subcontinent, away from the towering pagodas and pyramids, and into the cool, shadowed depths of a monumental stepwell. These are not mere water sources, they are inverted palaces, breathtaking architectural feats carved deep into the ground. As you walk down the long, symmetrical staircases that plunge stories below the surface, you are entering a sanctuary that is inherently protected from one of an earthquake's most destructive elements, the surface waves. These waves, which travel along the top layers of the Earth's crust, carry the most violent side-to-side shaking that demolishes surface structures. But here, deep underground, that destructive energy is already significantly dampened. The stepwell is shielded by the very mass of the Earth surrounding it, with the ground itself acting as a colossal buffer, absorbing and dispersing the high-frequency shocks before they can ever reach the intricate carvings and galleries within. This subterranean strategy was a masterstroke of defensive positioning, using depth as a primary tool for survival. This philosophy of carving directly into the living rock reaches its absolute apex at the rock-cut temples of Ellora, particularly the magnificent Kailasa temple. Imagine not building a temple but uncovering one by painstakingly carving a single, massive basalt cliff from the top down. The result is a structure that is not assembled, it is born from the bedrock. This monolithic construction is the ultimate seismic solution because it completely eliminates the weakest link in any built structure, the joints. There are no mortar joints, no connections between separate blocks that can shift, loosen, or fail under stress. Every column, every sculpted deity, every soaring ceiling is an unbroken part of the original stone matrix. When an earthquake occurs, the entire temple complex moves as one with the mountain it is a part of. There is no differential movement, no separate components to be shaken apart. The energy of the seismic waves travels through this singular, immense mass of rock, and the temple, fused to the earth, simply rides the motion. It is a perfect union of architecture and geology, where the structure's greatest strength comes from its refusal to be separate from the foundation it stands on. The architects of these wonders displayed an incredible understanding of material integrity. When they carved a pillar inside a cave temple, they weren't placing a separate stone cylinder onto a base. They were revealing a pillar from the surrounding rock, leaving it connected at both the top and bottom. This created a continuous load path of incredible strength. Similarly, the vast ceilings of these halls are not made of individual beams that could snap. They are the uncarved, original roof of the cavern, with all the natural compressive strength of the intact stone stratum. By avoiding weak points and creating everything from a single, continuous piece of stone, the builders engineered a form of perfect structural continuity. This approach stands in stark contrast to even the most advanced assembled structures, which are always vulnerable at their connections. Here, the only threat would be a fracture in the bedrock itself, a force so catastrophic that no human-made structure could hope to withstand it. This method represents a total trust in the Earth's inherent stability and a brilliant adaptation to leverage it. Back within the stepwells, the very design that provided access to water also created a uniquely resilient structural form. The signature feature of these wells is their cascading series of stepped landings and terraces, creating an inverted ziggurat shape. In a surface building, a collapse often begins at one weak point and then progresses through the structure, a domino effect known as progressive collapse. But in a stepwell, the terraces are essentially a series of independent stacked platforms. During significant ground movement, these individual terraces could settle and shift independently of one another. A crack or settlement on one level did not necessarily compromise the structural integrity of the level above or below it. The step design created natural fault lines or expansion joints that could accommodate movement without triggering a total structural failure. This compartmentalization of the structure meant that damage could be isolated and contained, allowing the majority of the stepwell to remain intact and functional even after a serious seismic event. The architecture itself was designed to fail in a safe, controlled manner, a principle that is a cornerstone of modern seismic design codes. Ultimately, this incredible underground architecture showcases a theme we see again and again in ancient engineering: intelligent adaptation. Instead of trying to impose a foreign structure upon the landscape, these Indian builders listened to the land and adapted their methods to its character. In a region with a deep water table and seismic risk, they didn't just build robust buildings on the surface. They went down into the most stable zone and carved their monuments from the very fabric of the earth. They understood that the greatest stability was to be found not in fighting geological forces, but in becoming one with them. The stepwells and rock-cut temples of India are not just feats of excavation. They are a profound expression of this symbiotic relationship, demonstrating that true resilience can be achieved by working with the enduring strength of the planet itself. But how was this intricate, life-saving knowledge preserved and passed down in a world without engineering textbooks or digital databases? The answer lies in one of humanity's oldest and most resilient technologies: the human voice and the power of memory. Picture a scene not in a classroom but around a communal fire where an elder, his face etched with the lines of experience, recites not just a story but what amounts to a living building code. The principles of seismic design were often encoded in poetic verses, rhythmic chants, and metaphorical tales. A complex rule about foundation depth might be wrapped in a legend about a badger digging its den, teaching that stability comes from going deep. A specification for wall batter, the inward slope, could be described in a song about a mountain that stands firm because it leans into the wind. This wasn't mere folklore, it was a sophisticated mnemonic system. By turning dry, technical specifications into memorable, rhythmic poetry, cultures ensured that every new generation of builders could carry the entire architectural rulebook in their heads, ready to be recalled and applied with unwavering consistency, long after the original engineers had turned to dust. The transmission of this wisdom was far more than just rote memorization. It was a holistic, lifelong journey of mentorship. A young apprentice didn't just learn how to carve a stone. He would spend decades working alongside a master builder, absorbing not only the precise angle of a cut or the perfect mix for a mortar, but the profound philosophical why behind every single decision. He learned why a certain type of wood was chosen for a lintel, not just for its strength, but for the way its grain allowed it to flex. He learned why a temple was oriented on a specific axis, not just for the sunrise, but to align with the dominant geological grain of the region, avoiding direct confrontation with seismic shockwaves. This knowledge was contextual and experiential. The master would point to a crack in an old wall and tell the story of the quake that caused it, explaining how the design was changed in the rebuilding to prevent it from happening again. This created a living, breathing database of environmental wisdom, a cumulative intelligence that linked specific building techniques to local soil types, historical weather patterns, and the collective memory of past seismic events. The apprentice was learning to read the landscape itself, to see the invisible forces of geology and physics, and to build in respectful conversation with them. This entire system of knowledge was powerfully reinforced by its deep integration with spiritual and cultural beliefs. In many societies, the act of building was not a secular task but a sacred duty. Temples and monuments were often dedicated to deities associated with the earth, mountains, or stability. A culture might worship a god of earthquakes, and in building a temple to appease that god, they would incorporate every known seismic-resistant technique, not just as an engineering requirement, but as a spiritual imperative. This divine connection ensured the entire community's commitment to building and maintaining these structures correctly. Cutting corners or ignoring the ancient verses wasn't just seen as poor workmanship. It was an act of sacrilege that could anger the gods and bring disaster upon the whole village. This spiritual framework provided a powerful, unifying motivation that transcended individual lifetimes. It ensured that the careful selection of stones, the meticulous fitting of joints, and the patient seasoning of timber were all carried out with a sense of reverence and collective responsibility. The resilience of the structure was directly tied to the spiritual well-being of the people, making its preservation a matter of cultural survival. We can see this powerful fusion of the practical and the sacred in traditions across the globe. In ancient Japan, the master carpenters known as Miya-Deku were not merely construction workers. They were considered spiritual artisans. Their work on Shinto shrines, which had to be rebuilt exactly every 20 years in the Ai's Jingu tradition, was a form of worship. The precise joinery that allowed the buildings to sway was seen as a reflection of the harmony between humanity and nature, a core tenet of Shinto belief. Similarly, in many indigenous cultures of the Americas, the placement of a dwelling or a ceremonial kiva was determined through consultation with elders and spiritual leaders who interpreted dreams and visions, which often subtly encoded generations of observed geological data about safe and stable sites. The knowledge was preserved because it was woven into the very identity of the people, into their songs, their ceremonies, and their relationship with the divine. It was a knowledge system that understood that for something to truly endure, it must be valued not just for its utility, but for its meaning, ensuring that the secrets of seismic survival were cherished, protected, and passed down as the most precious of cultural inheritances. For centuries, the resilience of these ancient structures was a matter of legend and anecdote, their secrets locked within the stone. Today, we no longer have to rely on speculation. A powerful new witness has taken the stand: modern science. Using sophisticated technologies like ground-penetrating radar and three-dimensional laser scanning, researchers are essentially giving these monuments a full body scan, peering deep into their hidden anatomy without ever touching a stone. What they are finding is a stunning validation of the intuitive genius we have been exploring. For instance, those scans of Inca foundations have revealed what earlier explorers could only guess at: deep trenches deliberately packed with layers of rounded gravel and sand, precisely the kind of flexible, energy-dissipating base isolation system we described. The radar waves paint a picture of an intentional, engineered cushion, confirming that the choice of material was a calculated seismic strategy, not just convenient backfill. Similarly, scans of massive walls in places like the Roman Colosseum show internal cavities and rubble cores, the very same damping chambers that ancient builders used to absorb and dissipate the violent energy of tremors, turning destructive force into harmless friction deep within the heart of the structure. The forensic analysis extends from the large scale down to the microscopic. Scientists have taken tiny samples of ancient mortars from sites across the globe, from the pyramids of Egypt to the temples of Angkor Wat, and subjected them to chemical analysis. The results are consistently astonishing. These were not simple mixtures of sand and lime. They were complex, engineered composites. Analysis has revealed the intentional inclusion of organic additives like tree bark extracts, fruit sugars, rice paste, and even egg whites. At first, this might sound like a peculiar ancient recipe, but the science behind it is brilliant. These organic compounds acted as natural plasticizers. They changed the crystalline structure of the setting mortar, giving it a degree of flexibility and tensile strength that plain, brittle mortar could never achieve. This created a binding agent that could flex and stretch minutely under stress, allowing the stones to shift without the entire joint failing. In some cases, these organic components also promoted a slow, long-term chemical reaction that allowed the mortar to actually self-heal tiny cracks over time, as dissolved minerals recrystallized in the gaps. This was a living, breathing material science, creating mortars that were, in many ways, more advanced and durable than the rigid Portland cement commonly used in the 20th century. Perhaps the most dramatic validations come from the world of structural engineering labs, where researchers build precise, scaled-down models of ancient walls and subject them to simulated earthquakes on massive shake tables. These experiments provide a visual and data-driven proof of concepts we have only been able to theorize about. A model of a standard, mortared modern wall, when shaken, typically fails quickly, with a single, catastrophic crack propagating through the rigid structure. But when a model of an Inca polygonal wall is placed on the same table, the result is completely different. As the shaking begins, the entire wall comes alive with a myriad of tiny, micro-movements. The interlocking stones grind and shift against each other, their complex faces ensuring they never slide apart. The energy from the simulated quake is redistributed and dissipated as friction and sound across hundreds of individual joints. The wall may lean and deform slightly, but it does not collapse. It settles into a new, stable configuration, having gracefully weathered the storm. These tests provide irrefutable, quantitative data showing that these ancient techniques don't just work. In many cases, they outperform modern rigid construction for low-rise, high-mass buildings in seismic zones. This growing body of evidence is doing more than just confirming the past. It is actively inspiring a revolution in contemporary engineering. Today's architects and engineers are increasingly looking to hybridize these time-tested passive systems with active modern technologies. The principles of base isolation, first seen in those gravel-filled Inca trenches, are now a standard, though highly engineered, feature in everything from hospitals to skyscrapers, using layers of steel and rubber to achieve the same decoupling effect. The concept of flexible, jointed structures is influencing the design of buildings in earthquake-prone regions, with engineers creating expansion joints and moment-resisting frames that mimic the behavior of those ancient interlocking stones. The discovery of self-healing Roman concrete has spurred a whole new field of research into bioconcrete, where embedded bacteria produce limestone to fill cracks. This cross-pollination between ancient empirical wisdom and cutting-edge computational modeling is creating a new, more resilient architectural language. It proves that our ancestors were not primitive guessworkers. They were master observers and material scientists whose empirical knowledge, honed over millennia, has achieved a level of sophistication that we are only now, with all our technology, fully beginning to appreciate and reintegrate into our own quest for a safer built environment. It's a powerful moment when you place two blueprints side by side, one showing a sleek, modern skyscraper resting on massive, engineered base isolators, and the other depicting the intricate stonework of an Inca wall set upon its bed of gravel. At first glance, they seem worlds apart, separated by centuries of technological progress. Yet, if you trace the flow of forces through each design, you'll discover they are speaking the same fundamental language. Both systems are built on the principle of decoupling, the brilliant idea of introducing a flexible layer that allows the structure to move independently from the ground's violent shaking. The modern high-rise uses precisely calibrated layers of steel and rubber, designed in sophisticated computer models to have a specific damping coefficient and fundamental period. The ancient wall uses a carefully prepared layer of rounded stones, chosen through generations of observation because they were seen to roll and shift, absorbing the earthquake's punch. The goal is identical: to interrupt the direct transfer of destructive energy. It's a stunning convergence of intuition and calculation, where ancient empirical wisdom arrived at the same vital conclusion as our most advanced physics. The paths these two engineering philosophies take to reach that goal, however, diverge dramatically in their tools and their underlying philosophy. Modern seismic engineering is a discipline of prediction and control. It relies on complex mathematical models that simulate how a building will respond to a spectrum of possible ground motions. We use finite element analysis to understand stress distribution, and we create synthetic materials like high-strength steel alloys and carbon fiber composites with precisely defined properties. Our approach is active and interventionist. We design dampers that act like shock absorbers in a car, and we even use massive computer-controlled weights at the top of buildings to actively push back against sway in real time. It is engineering rooted in the power of calculation, aiming to remove uncertainty and create structures whose behavior we can forecast with remarkable accuracy. We build with the confidence that our models can tell us, within a narrow margin, exactly how a 50-story tower will perform when the Earth moves. Ancient engineering, by beautiful contrast, was a discipline of acceptance and harmony. Without differential equations or material data sheets, builders turned to the wisdom embedded in the natural world. Their mathematical model was geometry itself, the intuitive understanding that a pyramid is inherently stable, that a zigzag wall breaks up waves, and that interlocking polygons create a flexible whole. Their materials were not manufactured, they were cultivated and selected from the local environment. Timber with the right grain for flexibility, stones that were seasoned by years of weather, and mortars enhanced with organic compounds to grant them a living flexibility. This was a passive approach. Instead of trying to control the earthquake's force, the goal was to create a structure that could gracefully absorb it, dissipating energy through friction, minute movements, and its own mass. The ancient builders' confidence came not from a computer printout, but from the proven performance of ancestral designs and the deep-seated knowledge that they were building in rhythm with the Earth's nature, not against it. This fundamental difference in approach leads to a critical trade-off, one that defines the strengths and limitations of each school of thought. The great triumph of modern engineering is its breathtaking scalability and predictability. Our methods allow us to construct cities that reach for the clouds with complex networks of services, vast open interior spaces, and forms that defy gravity. We can confidently build a hospital or a data center in a seismic zone, knowing it has a 98% chance of surviving a design-level earthquake with minimal damage. This predictability is the bedrock of modern urban life and global infrastructure. Ancient methods, while incredibly effective, were not easily scaled to such heights or complexities. You cannot build a 50-story pagoda using only wood joinery and a suspended pillar. The forces become too immense. Furthermore, ancient construction was an artisanal process, reliant on the skill of master builders. Its outcomes, while often spectacularly durable, were less predictable in a quantitative sense. You built the wall as your ancestors did, and you trusted it would stand, but you couldn't run a simulation to prove it first. Yet, when we shift our focus from height and complexity to sheer longevity and environmental harmony, the ancient approach reveals its profound advantages. Consider the lifespan of these structures. Many modern buildings, even with all their technology, have a designed lifespan of perhaps 50 to 100 years before major renovation or demolition. The Parthenon, Machu Picchu, and the pagodas of Japan have already endured for well over 1,000. This incredible durability stems from their use of natural, often monolithic or tightly fitted materials that age gracefully, and their passive systems that require no energy, no maintenance, and never become obsolete. There are no rubber isolators to perish in the sun, no hydraulic fluid to leak, no computer sensors to fail. The sustainability is equally compelling. Ancient construction was inherently local and low energy, utilizing stone from nearby quarries and timber from sustainable forests. There was no carbon-intensive production of steel or concrete, no global supply chain. The entire process was embedded within the local ecosystem, creating a minimal environmental footprint, a lesson in green building that we are only now desperately trying to relearn. This is not a contest to declare one approach the winner. The real power, the most promising frontier in seismic resilience, lies in a thoughtful integration of both worlds. Imagine the possibilities of a hybrid architecture. What if we designed modern buildings that not only had base isolators, but also featured walls with advanced, interlocking composite panels that mimic the energy-dissipating qualities of Inca masonry? What if we developed new, bio-based concretes that use ancient recipes for self-healing, reducing maintenance and extending a building's life for centuries? We are already seeing the seeds of this fusion. Some contemporary structures in seismic zones are incorporating tuned liquid column dampers, which use the sloshing of water to counteract sway, a principle not so different from the loose rubble cores in ancient pyramids, just refined with modern hydraulics. This synthesis allows us to aim for the best of both: the height, complexity, and predictability of modern engineering, combined with the legendary durability, sustainability, and passive resilience of ancient wisdom. It's a conversation across time, where the intuitive genius of the past provides a vital critique and a rich source of inspiration for a safer, more enduring future. Now, let us lift our gaze from the earth to the heavens, because the secrets of seismic survival were not only found underfoot, but also written in the stars. Across the ancient world, the process of choosing where to build was considered as crucial as how to build, a decision guided by a profound fusion of celestial observation and terrestrial intuition. This was not mere superstition. It was a sophisticated system of risk assessment, where the language of cosmology and the principles of stable geology were one and the same. By aligning their most sacred and important structures with the eternal cycles of the cosmos, ancient builders were, often unknowingly, following a hidden geological map that led them to the safest, most stable ground, creating a powerful synergy between spiritual belief and physical survival. In China, this wisdom was codified into the ancient practice of Feng Shui, which translates poetically as wind and water. At its heart, Feng Shui is the art of placing human structures in harmonious alignment with the natural flow of energy, or Kai, through the landscape. Practitioners would spend days, even weeks, reading the contours of the land, searching for the most auspicious sites. They sought out locations along what were called dragon lines, veins of beneficial energy that were believed to course through the earth. In a stunning convergence of belief and geology, these dragon lines very frequently corresponded to the spines of solid geological ridges, the sturdy backbones of hills and mountains. Building on these ridges meant constructing on a foundation of stable, consolidated rock, naturally elevated above the soft, water-logged valleys and floodplains that were not only spiritually inauspicious but also geotechnically hazardous. A valley might be a pool of stagnant Kai, but it was also a basin of alluvial soil prone to liquefaction during an earthquake, where solid ground can turn to soup. The spiritual injunction against such sites was, in effect, a brilliant, coded warning against geological instability, ensuring that palaces, temples, and tombs were placed on ground that was inherently resilient. This deep connection between the celestial and the terrestrial unfolds with equal brilliance in the Americas. Consider the grand ceremonial centers of the Maya and the vast city of Teotihuacan. Their pyramids and temples are masterpieces of astronomical alignment, precisely oriented to capture the sun's rays on the solstices and equinoxes. At Chichen Itza, during the spring and autumn equinox, the play of light and shadow on El Castillo creates the illusion of a serpent slithering down the pyramid staircase, a direct communion with the feathered serpent god Kukulkan. This precise orientation, however, served a dual, earthbound purpose. The dominant geological fault lines in a region often run in specific, predictable directions. By aligning their massive structures along cardinal points or significant astronomical axes, the builders were, quite by coincidence, often positioning them parallel to the direction of the region's most powerful seismic waves. When an earthquake strikes, the most destructive waves travel perpendicular to the fault line. A structure whose long axis is parallel to the fault is presented with its narrowest profile to these oncoming waves, significantly reducing the surface area that takes the direct hit. The spiritual act of aligning with the cosmos thus provided a form of inherent seismic shielding, a passive defense built directly into the site plan itself. This fusion of disciplines created what we might call a holistic risk assessment protocol, a way of viewing the landscape through multiple, complementary lenses. The ancient site selector was part priest, part astronomer, and part geologist. He would observe where certain plants thrived, indicating good drainage and stable soil. He would note the behavior of animals and the taste of the water from different springs. All of these practical observations were woven into a cosmological framework that gave them profound cultural meaning. A spring was not just a source of water, it was a manifestation of an earth dragon's breath. A particular rock outcrop was not just a stable foundation, it was a sacred ancestor. This integrated worldview ensured that every factor was considered. A site had to be spiritually resonant, which in practice meant it felt right. It was defensible, had clean water, good sightlines, and most importantly, it felt stable and secure. This feeling was the culmination of generations of accumulated environmental knowledge, distilled into a spiritual and aesthetic sensibility. The legacy of this ancient wisdom challenges our modern, highly specialized approach to planning. Today, a geotechnical engineer might survey a site and a developer might choose it for economic reasons, with little thought given to its orientation to the sun, the wind, or the spiritual character of the place. The ancient method, by contrast, was inherently multidisciplinary and sustainable. It produced cities and monuments that felt organically part of their environment, both physically and spiritually. They were situated to catch the morning sun and avoid the harsh afternoon winds, to be near life-giving water but safe from flooding, and to stand firmly upon the most stable geological formations, all under the benevolent watch of the celestial gods. This was not a primitive understanding of the world. It was a deeply sophisticated one that recognized the complex interconnections between heaven, earth, and human habitation. By seeking harmony with cosmic and terrestrial forces, our ancestors were not just building for their gods, they were building for eternity, choosing locations whose inherent stability was as much a gift from the earth as it was a blessing from the heavens. In our relentless pursuit of efficiency and cost-effectiveness, modern construction has inadvertently left behind a treasure trove of ancient techniques, subtle arts that endowed structures with an almost lifelike resilience. Consider the humble mortar, the glue that holds masonry together. Today, we use rigid, high-strength Portland cement, a material that is incredibly strong in compression but brittle and unforgiving under tension. Now imagine a different kind of mortar, one mixed not just with sand and lime, but with unexpected ingredients like fruit sugars, sticky rice soup, or even egg whites. This might sound like a bizarre culinary experiment, but it was a stroke of materials genius. These organic additives acted as natural plasticizers. They changed the very chemistry of the setting process, creating a mortar with a flexible, crystalline structure that could actually absorb vibrations and shift minutely without shattering. Even more remarkably, this organic-infused plaster possessed a self-healing quality. Over time, exposure to moisture and air would allow unreacted lime in the mortar to slowly dissolve and then recrystallize inside any tiny cracks that formed, effectively knitting the material back together. This was not a static binder, it was a dynamic, living system that maintained its own integrity, a far cry from our modern mortars that once cracked, stay cracked, inviting water and further deterioration. Beyond the chemistry of the binding agent, ancient builders manipulated the very form of their walls to tame seismic energy. In several cultures, from the Middle East to parts of Asia, we find evidence of walls constructed with intentional hollow spaces or voids within their core. At first glance, this might be mistaken for a way to save on material or reduce weight. In reality, it was a deliberate acoustic damping strategy. When a seismic wave, which is essentially a wave of sound energy traveling through the earth, strikes a solid, monolithic wall, it passes through it efficiently, setting the entire structure vibrating at a resonant frequency that can tear it apart. But when that same wave encounters a wall with a network of internal cavities, something remarkable happens. The sound waves enter these hollow chambers and become trapped, bouncing around chaotically. This process, known as acoustic damping, disrupts the coherent frequency of the seismic wave, scattering its energy and converting it into harmless, disorganized noise and heat within the wall itself. The structure, in effect, had a built-in soundproofing system against the Earth's roar, a passive technology that required no energy and never failed, turning the wall into a sophisticated seismic filter. The ancient mastery of materials extended even to the patient preparation of the stone itself, in a practice we might call seasoning. Imagine a quarry where stones are not rushed directly to the construction site. Instead, they are carefully set aside in open yards, exposed to the sun, rain, wind, and frost for years, sometimes even decades. This was not a logistical delay, it was a critical phase of material engineering. Freshly quarried stone often contains natural internal stresses and moisture. By allowing the stone to undergo countless cycles of heating and cooling, wetting and drying, these internal stresses are gradually relieved. The stone effectively settles and stabilizes. In some types of limestone and sandstone, This weathering process can even encourage a slight hardening of the surface as minerals are redeposited, creating a more durable outer skin. The resulting blocks were less likely to develop sudden, unpredictable fractures when subjected to the immense and uneven loads of an earthquake. They had already endured a lifetime of environmental stress in the quarry, making them seasoned veterans before they ever became part of a wall. This practice demonstrated a profound understanding that materials are not inert but dynamic, and that time itself could be used as a tool to enhance their inherent properties. Why then have these brilliantly effective methods been largely forgotten? The answer lies in the fundamental shift in our priorities. The modern world is driven by speed, scalability, and immediate economic return. The ancient methods were inherently time-intensive and labor-centric. Waiting years for stones to season is incompatible with a 12-month construction schedule. Mixing mortars with carefully prepared organic compounds is far more complex and costly than ordering standardized bags of cement. Building walls with intricate internal voids requires a level of artisan skill that is rare and expensive in today's labor market. We have chosen the path of standardization and predictability, favoring materials and methods that can be quickly applied by a less specialized workforce, and that produce consistent, quantifiable results in the short term. In this trade-off, we have gained incredible speed and the ability to build on a colossal scale, but we have sacrificed some of the nuanced, long-term resilience that characterized ancient construction. We optimized for cost and schedule, sometimes at the expense of longevity. The lesson here is not that we should abandon modern engineering and return to chiseling stones by hand. Rather, it is a powerful reminder that true sustainability and resilience often require a different calculus, one that values long-term performance over short-term savings. These lost arts challenge us to think about the entire life cycle of a building, not just its initial construction cost. A structure that can self-heal its own cracks and dampen seismic energy passively could save immense sums in maintenance and repair over centuries, not to mention the incalculable value of human lives protected. Today, we are seeing the first glimmers of a return to this wisdom in the form of advanced materials science. Researchers are developing self-healing concretes embedded with bacteria that produce limestone to fill cracks, a direct echo of those ancient organic mortars. Engineers are designing new composite panels with microcavities designed to disrupt specific sound and vibration frequencies. The spirit of these lost arts is being reborn through technology. By looking back at what was abandoned in the name of progress, we can find inspiration for a new kind of architecture, one that marries the efficiency of the modern age with the timeless, resilient intelligence of the ancient world, creating structures that are not just built for our time but are crafted for the ages. Now let's step outside the quarry and the workshop and into the living world, because the ultimate teacher for these ancient engineers was not a set of tools, but the ecosystem itself. Picture a dense bamboo forest in Southeast Asia as a typhoon rages through. The wind is ferocious, capable of snapping mature trees like twigs, yet the bamboo grove responds with a breathtaking display of survival. Instead of resisting, each tall, slender stalk bends almost horizontally, its hollow, segmented structure allowing it to whip and sway with the storm's energy. When the winds finally subside, the bamboo simply springs back, upright and virtually unscathed. For generations, local builders watched this natural performance, and they saw more than just plants. They saw a masterclass in structural engineering. They understood that this incredible flexibility was the key to surviving not just typhoons, but the similar lateral forces of an earthquake. So, they began to incorporate bamboo directly into their buildings, using it to create a flexible skeleton within walls of wattle and daub, or to lash together wooden frames with incredible tensile strength. The bamboo's natural give allowed the entire structure to sway and deform during a tremor, then rebound to its original position, just like the forest itself. This wasn't just using a locally available material. It was a conscious decision to replicate a proven, biological survival strategy, creating architecture that was literally rooted in the resilience of the local landscape. This same deep, observational wisdom guided builders in the world's arid zones, in vast desert regions where the primary building material was often the earth itself. Architects became keen students of the sand dune. At first glance, a desert might seem like a landscape of chaos, shaped by the whims of the wind, but if you watch over time, you see a profound order. The wind sculpts the sand into dunes with long, gentle, curved slopes on the windward side and steeper, more abrupt slip faces on the leeward side. This shape is no accident. It is the most aerodynamically stable form for that environment, designed by nature to deflect the wind's energy smoothly up and over the crest, minimizing erosion and maintaining the dune's integrity. Ancient builders in places like the Middle East and North Africa internalized this lesson. They didn't build square, flat-walled houses that would present a blunt, resistant face to the wind and seismic shocks. Instead, they constructed buildings with rounded, curvilinear walls and domed roofs. These curved surfaces, inspired by the dunes, were brilliant at deflecting not only the constant force of the desert wind, but also the sudden, violent push of seismic waves. There were no sharp corners for the energy to concentrate against and tear apart. The forces would simply glide along the curved surface, flowing around the structure much like the wind flows over a dune. This was passive safety designed by the desert itself, a perfect example of how ancient engineers learned to read the land and translate its most stable forms into human habitation. For cultures living along volatile coastlines, the inspiration came from the meeting of sea and land. Imagine an ancient Pacific islander or a builder from a coastal Peruvian culture standing on the shore, watching the awesome power of storm waves crashing against a coral reef. The reef does not attempt to be a solid, unbreakable wall. Instead, its complex, porous, and jagged structure acts as a natural breakwater. As a massive wave approaches, it doesn't hit a single surface. It slams into a labyrinth of coral branches and crevices. The wave's energy is immediately broken up, fragmented into 1,000 smaller, chaotic currents. Its destructive, unified force is dissipated as turbulence and foam, so that by the time the water reaches the sheltered lagoon behind the reef, it is reduced to a gentle, lapping swell. This natural energy dissipation did not go unnoticed. These coastal engineers began to replicate this principle in their foundations. In place of solid, monolithic footings, they would construct foundations using loose, layered stones, creating a porous, rubble-filled base that mimicked the reef's structure. When the seismic waves, which behave much like sound waves or water waves, traveled through the earth and hit this foundation, they wouldn't reflect back into the structure. Instead, they would penetrate the jumbled mass of stone, their energy scattering and getting trapped within the countless voids and interfaces, just like the wave energy in the coral reef. The foundation itself became a seismic breakwater, protecting the building above by turning a unified shock into a harmless, dispersed rumble deep within the ground. This overarching approach, where the local environment directly informs the engineering solution, is what we now call biomimicry, and it represents one of the most sophisticated aspects of ancient seismic design. It wasn't a one-size-fits-all philosophy. The solution for a rainy, bamboo-rich jungle was completely different from the solution for a windy desert. which was different again from the solution for a rocky coastline. This context specificity was their greatest strength. Builders worked with the materials and lessons their immediate environment provided, creating an architecture that was not imposed upon the landscape, but which grew organically from it. The bamboo-reinforced house in Vietnam, the curved earth brick home in Yemen, and the rubble foundation temple in Peru all look completely different, yet they all embody the same profound principle. To survive the forces of nature, one must first learn to speak its language. They observed the successful strategies of the local flora, geology, and hydrology, and then they faithfully translated those strategies into their built world. This stands in quiet contrast to much of modern construction, which often prioritizes standardization for the sake of efficiency and cost. We ship identical steel beams, concrete forms, and glass panels to every corner of the globe, creating buildings that may be technologically advanced but are often environmentally deaf. A glass skyscraper built in a seismic zone may have advanced dampers, but its vast, flat, rigid surfaces are fundamentally fighting the local conditions rather than working with them. The ancient approach challenges this paradigm. It suggests that true resilience is not just about adding technology to a standard design, but about deeply customizing the design from its very inception to its specific place on the planet. The genius of these ancient builders lay in their humility and their powers of observation. They didn't assume they were smarter than the forces they faced. Instead, they looked to the natural systems that had been successfully weathering those same forces for millennia and asked a simple, brilliant question: how can we build in a way that works as well as that? Their legacy is a global tapestry of architectural solutions, each one a unique and eloquent response to the voice of its local earth and sky. So far, our journey has focused on the stones, the joints, and the brilliant engineering of individual monuments. But the story of ancient seismic wisdom doesn't end at the temple wall. It expands outward to shape the very blueprint of entire cities and the rhythm of daily life. Imagine walking through the heart of an ancient metropolis like Mohenjo-Daro in the Indus Valley or the grand capital of the Inca, Cusco. You would find yourself on remarkably wide, straight boulevards, often interpreted as grand processional routes for ceremonies and parades. But these avenues served a second, equally vital purpose. They were meticulously planned seismic fire breaks and evacuation corridors. In the chaotic aftermath of a major earthquake, when collapsed buildings and cooking fires could ignite a city-wide inferno, these wide open spaces acted as crucial barriers, starving the flames of fuel and preventing a catastrophe from compounding into a total conflagration. Simultaneously, they provided clear, unobstructed paths for people to flee to safety and for rescue and recovery efforts to move unimpeded. This was urban planning with a profound understanding of disaster cascades, where a single architectural feature was designed to solve multiple problems at once, blending the sacred needs of ceremony with the practical demands of survival. This multi-layered intelligence extended to the very laws that governed where things were built, a form of ancient zoning that was deeply informed by geological reality. City planners and rulers enacted strict codes that determined the placement of a community's most critical infrastructure. Granaries, which held the entire city's food supply, and massive water reservoirs, the source of life itself, were never left to chance. They were strategically located on the most stable, elevated ground available, often on solid bedrock outcrops, well away from riverbanks or soft, low-lying areas prone to liquefaction. This ensured that even if the residential districts were heavily damaged, the vital lifelines of food and water would remain intact, preventing famine and disease in the vulnerable days and weeks following a disaster. Conversely, the dwellings of the common people were often constructed using intentionally lightweight and flexible materials, woven bamboo, timber frames, and adobe bricks. This wasn't a sign of poverty or inferior technique. It was a deliberate safety strategy. A collapsed lightweight house is far more likely to leave survivable void spaces and is dramatically easier and faster to dig out from, saving countless lives. It also places much less crushing weight on those trapped inside. The heavy, immovable stone was reserved for temples and palaces, structures meant to symbolize eternal stability, while the homes of the people were designed for life-saving collapse, a poignant and pragmatic hierarchy of safety. This culture of resilience was then woven directly into the social and spiritual fabric of the community through ritual and shared responsibility. In many societies, the calendar was marked not just by harvest festivals and religious holidays, but by community-wide maintenance days. These were events where, led by priests and elders, the entire populace would come together to inspect, clean, and repair public structures. They would check the foundations of important buildings, clear debris from drainage canals that could clog during tremors, and reinforce walls. This practice transformed seismic preparedness from an abstract governmental duty into a tangible, collective ritual. It fostered a powerful sense of shared ownership and responsibility for the city's safety. Everyone, from the master builder to the youngest apprentice, understood that the integrity of their walls was synonymous with the security of their families. This created a society that was not passively waiting for disaster, but actively and continuously engaged in its own defense, building social cohesion and trust that proved as vital as any stone wall when a real crisis struck. The ultimate result of this deeply integrated approach, intelligent urban design, risk-based zoning, and a culture of communal maintenance, was the creation of what we would now call a resilient society. These ancient cities were not just collections of earthquake-resistant buildings, they were holistic systems engineered for recovery. When a quake did strike, the damage was often compartmentalized. Fires were contained by the wide avenues, the food and water supply was secure, and because the community was already organized around the principle of mutual aid and had practiced response protocols through their rituals, they could spring into action immediately. There was no need to wait for distant central authorities. The capacity for response was embedded within the community itself. This dramatically shortened the recovery time, allowing the city to rebuild and return to normal function much faster than a comparable modern city might, where infrastructure is centralized, communities are more fragmented, and response relies on complex, top-down logistics. It is this very model of embedded, community-centric resilience that modern urban planners and disaster response experts are now urgently revisiting. In the face of climate change and growing urban populations in seismic zones, the limitations of our top-down, technology-heavy approach are becoming clear. We build stronger skyscrapers, but we often neglect the social and urban fabric that connects them. The ancient model teaches us that resilience cannot be bolted on. It must be baked in, from the width of the streets to the location of our storage facilities to the very rituals that bind a community together. The visionary wisdom of these ancient city planners offers a powerful lesson that the safest city is not necessarily the one with the strongest individual buildings, but the one whose entire design, from its grandest boulevard to its most humble home, is conceived as a single, integrated, and life-sustaining system, ready to bend, to adapt, and to endure. Sometimes the most vital engineering codes were not written on stone tablets, but woven into the very fabric of a culture's identity, told and retold as epic tales around flickering fires. Consider the powerful and widespread myth of a giant serpent or dragon dwelling deep within the earth, whose restless thrashing was said to cause the ground to shake. This was not merely a primitive attempt to explain a terrifying natural phenomenon. For a community living in a seismically active region, this story functioned as a critical, life-saving geological advisory. The serpent was a brilliant metaphor for the active fault line itself. The narrative, passed from elder to child, inherently taught a crucial lesson. If the serpent lives there, we must not build our homes upon its back. The story created a powerful cultural taboo against settling in geologically unstable areas, guiding people intuitively toward safer, more stable ground without anyone ever needing to understand the complex science of plate tectonics. It was risk assessment encoded in a form that was unforgettable, ensuring that even the youngest members of the society understood the fundamental danger of certain landscapes. This narrative wisdom extended all the way back to the very beginning, to stories of how the world itself was formed. Many creation myths are filled with what sound like divine commandments, but which, upon closer inspection, read like precise building specifications. A god might instruct the first people to lay the foundation stones upon the bones of the mountain, a poetic yet perfectly accurate instruction to build on solid bedrock rather than soft, unstable soil. Another deity might command that a temple's pillars be set deep like the roots of the great tree, effectively prescribing the need for deep pilings to anchor a structure against lateral forces. These were not arbitrary spiritual edicts. They were the distilled, empirical knowledge of generations of builders, elevated to sacred law to ensure compliance. By framing these essential engineering principles as the direct instructions of a creator god, the culture guaranteed that they would be followed with religious fervor. To ignore them was not just bad practice, it was blasphemy, ensuring that these life-preserving techniques were applied with unwavering consistency across centuries. The great epic poems of antiquity often served a similar, surprisingly practical function. Within the sweeping tales of heroes, wars, and fallen cities, we frequently find incredibly detailed, almost technical, descriptions of legendary construction projects. The poet might spend dozens of lines describing how the master builder Hephaestus forged flexible bronze joints for the walls of a mythical city, or how the architects of a legendary metropolis used interlocking stones that could dance in a storm. For a modern listener, this is beautiful imagery. For an ancient apprentice builder, it was a veritable textbook. These vivid descriptions preserved the memory of specific, effective seismic techniques long after the original structures had faded into dust. The epic poem became a living repository of advanced architectural knowledge, its rhythmic and repetitive structure making the complex information easy to memorize and recall. A master could point to a verse and say, "This is how we do it, just as the heroes of old did," ensuring that proven methods survived not as abstract concepts, but as part of a celebrated cultural heritage. This system of knowledge preservation was perfectly adapted for a world where few could read or write. A detailed engineering manual on papyrus or clay would be fragile, inaccessible to most, and easily lost. But a compelling story, a stirring epic, or a sacred myth was immortal. It could be carried across continents and down through the generations without ever decaying. Every time the story of the earth serpent was told, the lesson about fault lines was reinforced. Every recitation of a creation myth reiterated the proper way to lay a foundation. The very act of celebrating a culture's history through poetry and song became, inadvertently, a continuous professional development seminar for its builders. The narrative format made the information relatable, emotionally resonant, and most importantly, impossible to forget. It embedded the how and why of resilient construction into the collective consciousness, making every citizen a guardian of this critical wisdom. We can see this principle at work across the globe. In the native traditions of the Pacific Northwest, stories of the thunderbird and the whale often involved colossal battles that shook the earth and sea. These tales, while explaining tsunamis and earthquakes, also carried subtle lessons about the dangers of low-lying coastal areas and the safety of higher ground. In Japanese folklore, the namezu, or giant catfish trapped under the earth by a stone, thrashes to cause quakes. The stone that holds it down is often associated with specific, stable geographical features, again guiding settlement away from the thrashing zones. These narratives were far more than fanciful creations. They were the most robust and enduring data storage system humanity has ever invented. They turned abstract geological hazards into tangible characters and transformed life-saving engineering principles into unforgettable plot points, ensuring that the wisdom of the ancients would echo through the ages, long after their cities had fallen and their languages had been forgotten. The true genius of ancient seismic engineering wasn't just found in their successes, but perhaps even more so in their response to failure. If you could peel back the layers of time at any great ancient site, you wouldn't find a single, perfect structure that sprang into being fully formed. Instead, you would discover a story written in stone and rubble, a narrative of collapse and rebirth. Archaeologists call this a tell, a mound created by centuries of human habitation where one city was built upon the ruins of another. But these layers are more than just historical records. They are a tangible timeline of a slow, deliberate, and brilliant process of iterative engineering. Each time a temple or a fortress was shaken down by an earthquake, it presented a harsh but invaluable lesson. The rubble wasn't just cleared away, it was a classroom. Master builders would sift through the destruction, their eyes trained to read the story of the collapse. Did the wall fall outward, indicating a failure of the foundation? Or did it crumble inward, suggesting the roof was too heavy? The specific pattern of the fallen stones, the angle of the cracks, the location of the failure, all of this was data. This was the ancient equivalent of a modern forensic post-disaster assessment, a meticulous analysis aimed at one goal: to ensure the next version would not make the same mistake. This process of learning from collapse led to a culture of fearless experimentation. Without the ability to run computer simulations, the only way to test a new idea was to build it and see if it stood the test of time and tectonics. Imagine a community deciding to rebuild their sacred temple. The elders and master builders would gather, not with blueprints, but with the collective memory of what had just failed. A debate would ensue. The mortar was too brittle, one might argue. Let us try mixing in more crushed seashells to give it flexibility. Another might observe. The walls were too thin and tall. They swayed like a reed before they snapped. We must make them thicker, or perhaps batter them inward for stability. They would experiment with different roof angles, discovering through trial and error that a steeper pitch could shed the weight of snow more effectively, but a shallower one presented a lower profile to seismic waves and was less likely to be thrown off its supports during a quake. Each reconstruction was a live, full-scale experiment. Some of these innovations worked spectacularly well and became part of the standard architectural canon. Others undoubtedly failed, leading to yet another cycle of analysis and rebuilding. This was a slow, generational form of research and development, where progress was measured not in years but in centuries. The results of this empirical refinement are visible in the archaeological record for those who know how to look. At the site of Haga Kim in Malta, for example, you can see how earlier temple structures used massive, monolithic stones placed upright. After seismic activity caused damage, later builders introduced internal buttressing and began using smaller, more manageable stones that could be more tightly interlocked. creating a more flexible and resilient structure. In Mesoamerica, the many layers of the Pyramid of the Sun at Teotihuacan reveal how each new phase of construction incorporated a wider base and a more stable Talud-Tablero slope, each iteration making the pyramid more resistant to the shaking that had damaged its predecessor. This was not haphazard construction, it was a deliberate, cumulative process of optimization. Over dozens of generations, these incremental changes, a slightly different mortar mix here, a more pronounced inward slope there, a new type of interlocking joint slowly accumulated. The final structure that we see and marvel at today was the end product of this relentless refinement, a design that had been literally stress-tested by the Earth itself and perfected through a long, slow conversation between human ingenuity and planetary forces. This willingness to fail, to learn, and to try again stands as one of the most powerful and enduring legacies of ancient innovation. It represents a fundamentally different relationship with failure than we often see in our modern, fast-paced world. For them, a collapse was not a catastrophe to be forgotten or a source of shame to be covered up. It was an opportunity, a harsh but necessary teacher. There was no ego in it. The master builder who had designed the collapsed temple would not be fired. His son or grandson would be tasked with studying his father's failure and improving upon it. This created a culture of continuous improvement that was built right into the social and spiritual fabric. The drive to build a more resilient temple was a sacred duty to the gods and a profound responsibility to future generations. This long-term perspective, this acceptance that perfection is a journey and not a destination, allowed them to achieve a level of tailored optimization that is almost impossible to replicate today. Their structures became perfectly adapted to their specific local conditions, the precise frequency of the seismic waves in that valley, the unique properties of the local limestone, the particular angle of the prevailing winds. They weren't building to a universal code, they were crafting a unique solution for a unique place, and they were patient enough to get it right, even if it took 1,000 years. It's one of history's most captivating mysteries, a story written not in a single language, but in the universal grammar of stone and survival. When we look at the Inca walls of Peru and the wooden pagodas of Japan, we are looking at two completely different worlds, separated by an entire ocean and thousands of years of independent cultural evolution. There was no trade route connecting Cusco to Kyoto, no shared blueprint, no ancient conference where master builders exchanged notes, and yet both cultures arrived at the same stunningly brilliant solution to the same terrifying problem. Both developed a form of base isolation, the principle of decoupling a structure from the shaking earth. The Incas used their beds of gravel and sand. The Japanese used their layered, sliding stone foundations. This is not a coincidence. It is a profound clue pointing to a deeper truth about human ingenuity and the very nature of the physical world we all inhabit. Certain principles of stability are not cultural inventions. They are universal constants, waiting to be discovered by anyone who observes the world with a patient and perceptive eye. This remarkable convergence of ideas extends far beyond the foundation. Consider the corbelled arch, a structural marvel that defies gravity not with a single keystone, but through the clever, incremental stacking of stone. In this technique, each layer of stone is placed so that it projects slightly inward over the one below, gradually narrowing the gap until the walls meet at the top, forming a stable, triangular-like vault. Now travel across the globe and through time to the palaces of the Mycenaean Greeks, to structures like the magnificent treasury of Atreus. Here you walk through a towering corbelled archway, a testament to Bronze Age engineering. Then journey to the jungles of Mesoamerica and stand beneath the vaulted ceilings of a Mayan palace at sites like Palenque. You are looking at the same architectural concept, born from two minds that never met. The Mycenaeans and the Maya, separated by 10,000 miles and centuries, both discovered that this inward-stepping construction created a structure that was inherently self-stabilizing. The weight of the stones themselves, channeled along the angled faces of each layer, created a powerful compressive force that locked the entire vault together. During an earthquake, this design proved incredibly resilient. Unlike a true arch with a single, vulnerable keystone, a corbelled vault had no single point of failure. The seismic energy was distributed across countless interlocking stone faces, and the entire structure could shift and settle as a cohesive, interlocked unit rather than collapsing. It was a geometric solution to a physical problem, and geometry, like physics, is a universal language. What could possibly explain this simultaneous discovery of the same life-saving techniques in such distant corners of the world? The answer lies not in secret communication, but in a shared methodology, a relentless, generations-long process of observing and mimicking the resilient systems of the natural world. A builder in ancient Greece could watch how a pile of fallen stones naturally settled into a stable slope, each rock supporting the ones above it. A builder in the Yucatan could observe the same principle in the way a bird builds its nest, with twigs layered inward to create a sturdy cup. They were both seeing the same physical law in action, the law that governs stability through gravity and friction. They saw that nature rarely uses right angles and rigid connections. It uses curves, interlocking patterns, and flexible joints. The bamboo that bends, the tree that sways, the riverbank that is stepped and layered to resist erosion, these were the open-source textbooks from which all ancient engineers, regardless of their culture, were learning. The universal challenge of surviving an earthquake was met with a universal strategy. Look to the environment, identify what remains standing after the storm, and replicate that successful design in your own architecture. The independent development of base isolation and corbelled arches isn't a bizarre anomaly. It is the predictable outcome of intelligent humans facing the same destructive forces, applying the same rigorous process of observation and experimentation to their local materials. This global pattern tells a story that transcends our traditional narratives of history, which often focus on conflict and difference. It reveals a powerful, underlying commonality in the human mind. When faced with an existential threat, our species possesses a remarkable capacity for convergent innovation. The same logical pathways, the same process of trial and error, lead different people in different places to remarkably similar conclusions. An engineer in ancient Japan, feeling the tremors and seeing his rigid structures fail, would logically ask, "How can I allow this building to move?" His solution over centuries was the flexible wooden joint and the suspended pillar. An engineer in the Andes, witnessing the same destruction, would ask the same fundamental question and arrive at the logic of the sliding stone foundation. They were both solving for the same variable in the same equation. This shared ingenuity suggests that the drive to protect our communities, to create safe and enduring spaces, is a fundamental part of the human spirit. The specific cultural expressions, the Shinto shrine, the Inca temple, are beautiful and unique, but the core engineering principles beneath them speak to a collective human intelligence. This narrative of commonality is perhaps the most hopeful lesson we can take from these ancient masters. In a world that often feels divided by borders and ideologies, the silent, enduring testimony of these monuments reminds us that we are all passengers on the same restless planet. We all feel the same ground shake beneath our feet. The Incas, the Japanese, the Maya, The Mycenaeans, they all looked up at the same stars and down at the same trembling earth, and they all used the brilliant problem-solving capacity of the human mind to find a way to endure. Their legacy is not just one of architectural wonder, but of a shared journey of discovery. It proves that the most profound truths about how to live in harmony with our world are not owned by any one culture. They are written into the fabric of nature itself, available to anyone, anywhere, who possesses the curiosity to look, the patience to learn, and the wisdom to build not in defiance of the Earth's power, but in a graceful, resilient conversation with it. Perhaps the most astonishing example of this ancient material mastery lies at the bottom of the sea, in the sunken harbors of the Roman Empire. For centuries, engineers and historians were baffled by the Roman concrete breakwaters that not only survived 2,000 years of pounding waves, but seemed to grow stronger with age, while our modern concrete structures crumble after a few decades in saltwater. The secret was finally unlocked by geochemists who, using advanced electron microscopes, peered into the very heart of a sample. They discovered that the Romans were not just mixing lime and sand, they were creating a sophisticated chemical cocktail. The key ingredient was volcanic ash, specifically a type of ash from the town of Pozzuoli, which they mixed with lime and seawater. When this mixture was poured, a remarkable reaction began. The seawater, far from being a corrosive agent, acted as a trigger, facilitating a slow, long-term chemical reaction between the lime and the volcanic ash. This process formed rare, plate-like crystals of a mineral called aluminous tobamorite within the concrete's matrix. Think of these crystals as a kind of reinforcing, self-generating fiber optic network. They are incredibly strong and, critically, they prevent the propagation of microcracks. As tiny fractures begin to form from the constant stress of waves or seismic tremors, they run into these interlocking, resilient crystals and are stopped in their tracks. Over centuries, this reaction continues, meaning the concrete doesn't just resist decay, it actively self-reinforces, becoming more monolithic and resilient with every passing year. This is the complete opposite of modern Portland cement, which is designed to set quickly and rigidly, but whose internal chemical structure is unstable over the long term, inevitably leading to cracking, spalling, and a steady loss of strength. The Romans weren't just building for their time, they were engineering a material for eternity, a concrete that was, in a very real sense, a living, growing stone. This same profound understanding of material behavior transformed something as simple as a mud brick into a seismic shock absorber. In ancient Mesopotamia, Egypt, and the Indus Valley, brickmakers were not merely shaping clay and straw and leaving it to bake in the sun. They were master ceramists who understood that different clay deposits had profoundly different personalities. They learned through painstaking experimentation that clays rich in certain minerals, like montmorillonite, possessed a unique property known as thixotropy. In simple terms, a thixotropic material is one that becomes less viscous, more fluid when subjected to stress. Imagine a thick, clay-rich slurry. If you stir it vigorously, it becomes thinner and easier to pour, but if you let it sit, it thickens back up. Now, imagine that property on a microscopic scale within a sun-dried brick. When a seismic wave hits a wall made of these special bricks, the sudden stress causes the clay particles to momentarily shift and realign, allowing the brick to flex and deform slightly without developing a catastrophic, brittle fracture. The energy of the quake is absorbed as the clay particles slide against each other, effectively turning each brick into a tiny, passive damper. Furthermore, the careful addition of specific types and lengths of straw or chopped reeds was not just about bulk, it was a form of natural fiber reinforcement. These organic fibers created a three-dimensional web within the clay matrix, a primitive but incredibly effective version of the steel rebar we use today. When a crack did begin to form, it would encounter these countless tiny fibers, which would bridge the gap and hold the material together, preventing the crack from propagating and causing the brick to shatter. The brick was designed to fail gracefully, developing a web of fine, controlled hairline cracks rather than disintegrating into a pile of dust, giving the occupants precious time to escape and leaving a structure that was often still standing and repairable. The ancient wisdom even extended to the very timber that framed their roofs and supported their walls. In cultures from Japan to Scandinavia, wood was not simply cut and used. It was a material to be cultivated, seasoned, and treated with a reverence that verged on the alchemical. Japanese temple builders, for instance, had a deep preference for hinoki cypress, not only for its straight grain and resistance to rot, but for its exceptional flexibility and tensile strength. But the process didn't stop at selecting the right tree. The wood was then meticulously seasoned, often for years, in a controlled environment to slowly equalize its moisture content and relieve internal stresses, making it less likely to warp or crack suddenly under load. Then came the treatments. In many parts of the world, builders discovered that soaking wood in natural oils like tung oil in China or linseed oil in Europe did more than just waterproof it. These penetrating oils help to preserve the wood's natural resins and plasticity, maintaining its flexibility and preventing it from becoming brittle with age. A wooden beam treated in this way could sway and flex during an earthquake, bending like a bow and then springing back to its original shape, whereas a dry, untreated beam of the same size might simply snap. Some cultures went even further, charring the surface of the wood that would be buried in the ground or exposed to the elements. This technique, known as shu-sugi-ban in Japan, created a layer of carbon that was impervious to insects, rot, and even fire, adding decades, if not centuries, to the lifespan of the structural members. This was a holistic approach to material science, where the life cycle of the resource, from its growth in the forest to its final, protected state in the building, was carefully managed to maximize its inherent strengths and mitigate its weaknesses, all to create a more resilient and enduring structure. What is truly humbling for modern science is that we are only now, with our most advanced analytical tools, beginning to decode the full complexity of these ancient composites. For the builders themselves, this knowledge was not derived from quantum mechanics or molecular chemistry. It was the result of centuries, even millennia, of relentless, patient, empirical experimentation. It was a knowledge built on a foundation of careful observation and a deep, intimate relationship with local resources. A Roman engineer may not have known what aluminous tobamorite was, but he knew that when he mixed this specific red ash from Pozzuoli with lime and seawater, he got a concrete that would last forever in the harbor. A Mesopotamian brickmaker couldn't define thixotropy, but he knew that the clay from the north bank of the river made bricks that could survive a tremor, while the clay from the south bank would crumble. This was a science of cause and effect, honed over generations and passed down as a sacred trust. The master builder knew the how and the what with absolute certainty, even if he didn't know the why on a microscopic level. This empirical mastery allowed them to create what we might now call smart materials composites, whose properties were perfectly tailored to their function. They weren't just using what was available, they were actively engineering their materials at a fundamental level, transforming humble clay, volcanic dust, and timber into sophisticated, high-performance components that gave their structures a resilience we are still struggling to match with all our synthetic chemistry and industrial processes. Now let's step out of the ancient world and into our own to see how these time-tarnished principles are experiencing a dramatic and inspiring rebirth in the architecture of today. This is not just a history lesson, it is a living conversation between past and present, where the intuitive genius of our ancestors is being validated and enhanced by our most advanced computational power and material science. The journey of seismic resilience has come full circle, and the results are transforming the skylines of the world's most earthquake-prone cities. We are witnessing a profound fusion of ancient intuition and modern innovation, creating structures that are smarter, safer, and more in harmony with the planet than ever before. One of the most breathtaking examples of this synthesis stands in the heart of Santiago, Chile. The titanium La Portada building, a stunning skyscraper, is stabilized by a technology that would feel deeply familiar to the master carpenters of Japan. At its very top, hidden from view, hangs a massive 30-story tuned liquid column damper. This isn't a simple weight. It's a sophisticated, computer-controlled system that uses the movement of a colossal volume of water to counteract the building's sway. The underlying principle, however, is a direct descendant of the Shinbashira in a Japanese pagoda. Both systems use a suspended, heavy mass that moves in opposition to the building's oscillations to dampen their force. The ancient pagoda used a giant wooden pillar swinging like a pendulum. The modern skyscraper uses a precisely calculated sloshing of water, guided by sensors and hydraulics. It's the same fundamental physics, one understood through centuries of observation, the other through complex differential equations. This building, and others like it around the world, are living proof that the ancient strategy of controlled, dynamic movement is not a relic, but a cornerstone of 21st century seismic safety. The innovation continues at the molecular level with the development of what are known as shape memory alloys. Imagine a steel beam in a building that, when bent and twisted by the enormous forces of an earthquake, doesn't just remain deformed or require costly replacement. Instead, when the shaking stops, it slowly, almost magically, returns to its original, perfectly straight form. This is not science fiction. It is the reality of metals like nickel titanium, which can remember their pre-deformed shape. When heated, either by ambient temperature or an electrical current, the metal's internal crystalline structure reverts, pulling the beam back into alignment. This revolutionary material property echoes the self-centering behavior of those ancient Inca walls we explored. After a tremor, the interlocking stones of Machu Picchu would shift and grind, but their complex shapes and the force of gravity would naturally guide them back to their most stable, interlocked position. The stones had a geometric memory, just as the new alloy has a material memory. Both systems are designed not just to survive the quake, but to return to a state of functional equilibrium afterward, drastically reducing repair costs and downtime, and ensuring the building is ready for the next event. It's a powerful example of how a principle observed in massive stone blocks is now being engineered into the very metal bones of our modern infrastructure. This revival of ancient wisdom extends far beyond seismic concerns, sparking a broader renaissance in what is called vernacular or bioclimatic architecture. Contemporary engineers and architects, faced with the dual crises of climate change and resource depletion, are increasingly turning to the past for sustainable solutions. They are studying the passive cooling techniques of traditional wind catchers in the Middle East, which channel breezes without any energy input, and the natural ventilation of the deep, shaded courtyards found in Spanish and North African homes. They are re-examining the thick, thermally massive walls of ancient adobe structures, which keep interiors cool by day and warm by night, eliminating the need for energy-intensive air conditioning and heating. This is not about nostalgia, it is about performance. These time-tested, passive systems offer a blueprint for dramatically reducing a building's energy consumption and carbon footprint. By learning how our ancestors kept comfortable without fossil fuels, we are discovering a path toward a more sustainable and resilient built environment, one that works with the local climate rather than fighting it with brute force mechanical systems. What we are witnessing is a fundamental shift in perspective, a quiet revolution in how we think about building. For much of the 20th century, the prevailing philosophy was one of dominance over nature. We used powerful machinery, abundant energy, and synthetic materials to impose our will on the landscape, creating sealed, climate-controlled boxes that often ignored their local context. The ancient approach, by beautiful contrast, was one of dialogue and harmony. It was an architecture of place, deeply responsive to local materials, climate, and geological realities. Today, the limitations of the old, dominant model are becoming painfully clear. Skyrocketing energy costs, unacceptable carbon emissions, and structures that are brittle and vulnerable. The return to ancient principles represents a maturation of our own engineering philosophy. We are learning that true advancement doesn't always mean inventing something entirely new. Sometimes it means rediscovering a profound truth that was known all along. It means humbly acknowledging that the empirical knowledge accumulated over millennia holds invaluable lessons for creating a sustainable future. This fusion of old and new is perhaps the most exciting frontier in architecture today. We are not simply copying ancient techniques, we are reinterpreting them with our modern toolkit. We can use computer modeling to optimize the angle of a wind catcher for a specific site, or to calculate the exact thermal mass needed in a wall to achieve perfect temperature stability. We can develop new composite materials that mimic the flexibility of timber or the self-healing properties of certain ancient mortars, but with greater strength and predictability. This allows us to create hybrid structures that achieve the best of both worlds, the height, complexity, and scalability of modern construction, combined with the legendary durability, sustainability, and passive resilience of ancient wisdom. The legacy of the ancient master builders is no longer confined to ruins and history books. It is alive and well, actively shaping the design of the hospitals, schools, museums, and homes of tomorrow. It is a legacy that teaches us that the safest, most enduring, and most beautiful architecture is not the one that stands rigidly against the forces of nature, but the one that has learned from the wisdom of the past how to move gracefully with them. This is the quiet crisis unfolding at the feet of our most resilient ancient monuments, a paradox where the very act of trying to save them can inadvertently seal their fate. Picture a team of dedicated conservators standing before a 2,000-year-old temple, a structure that has weathered countless earthquakes through its brilliant, flexible design. Their mission is to repair a crack, to stabilize a leaning wall, but their every decision is fraught with consequence. The greatest danger often comes from the most well-intentioned of solutions, the use of rigid, modern materials like Portland cement. When this hard, unyielding mortar is used to repoint the joints between ancient stones, it acts like a cast on a broken limb that's too tight. It immobilizes the structure. Those microscopic shifts and settlements, that intricate dance of interlocking stones that dissipated seismic energy for millennia, are suddenly frozen solid. The next time the earth shakes, the energy that was once harmlessly absorbed as friction across thousands of tiny movements now has nowhere to go. It concentrates at the newly rigid joint, and the immense force, denied its ancient outlet, can blow apart entire sections of the wall. In trying to mend the structure, we can strip it of the very flexibility that has been its secret to longevity, turning a dynamic, living system into a brittle, vulnerable shell. But the threats are not only in the hands of the restorers, they come from the very feet of the admirers. the relentless march of mass tourism, while a testament to our fascination with these sites, generates a constant, low-grade seismic event of its own. Imagine the cumulative impact of millions of footsteps each year, a steady, rhythmic vibration that gradually shakes the fine sediments and weakens age-old foundations. The infrastructure built to support this tourism, roads for buses, parking lots, and visitor centers, alters the natural drainage of the land and can change the delicate balance of groundwater. In places like Machu Picchu, the concern is profound. The construction of a nearby airport with its heavy machinery and altered landscapes could destabilize the very bedrock upon which the citadel rests. The daily pilgrimage of thousands of visitors creates a human-induced tremor that, over time, can be as damaging as a small, continuous earthquake, slowly grinding down the precision, joints, and unsettling the delicate equilibrium that has held for centuries. Faced with this modern dilemma, the field of conservation has undergone a profound philosophical shift. The old approach of heavy-handed restoration is giving way to a new ethos of minimal intervention. The guiding principle is now, do as little as possible but as much as necessary. This means conservationists are turning into high-tech detectives, using the tools of modern science not to rebuild but to listen. They employ laser scanning to create millimeter-perfect digital twins of a structure, allowing them to monitor the most minuscule movements over time. They use ground-penetrating radar to see inside walls and foundations without ever touching a stone, identifying hidden voids or areas of weakness. Fiber optic sensors are embedded to measure strain, and drones equipped with thermal cameras map temperature variations that can indicate stress points. This non-invasive monitoring creates a living health record for the monument, enabling conservators to understand its behavior and only intervene when and where it is absolutely critical, preserving its authentic historical fabric and its inherent seismic resilience. When intervention is unavoidable, the solutions are often as ingenious as the original construction techniques themselves. Instead of rigid cement, conservators now develop custom-matched soft mortars, sometimes even using the same organic additives, like lime mixed with fruit sugars or cactus juice that the original builders would have recognized. To stabilize a wall, they might use nearly invisible titanium rods, a material chosen for its strength and compatibility with stone, rather than rebuilding entire sections. In some cases, the most respectful repair is a technique known as anastylosis, where a collapsed structure is carefully reassembled using its original, fallen pieces, like a three-dimensional jigsaw puzzle, with only minimal, reversible new material added for support. The goal is never to make the structure look new again, but to preserve its ancient soul and, most importantly, its hard-earned ability to withstand the Earth's tremors. It is a painstaking, expensive, and time-consuming process, but it is the only way to ensure that these marvels of ancient engineering are not loved to death, that they can continue their silent, resilient conversation with the forces of nature for centuries more to come. As we've journeyed through the remarkable world of ancient seismic engineering, we've uncovered a legacy of innovation that rivals modern science in its sophistication and effectiveness. It's truly humbling to realize that long before the advent of computers or material science labs, human ingenuity had already decoded many of nature's most violent secrets. From the flexible foundations of Machu Picchu to the elegantly swaying pagodas of Japan, our ancestors didn't just build structures, they cultivated a relationship with the earth. They understood something we are only now, in our age of advanced technology, fully appreciating. That true resilience isn't about resisting natural forces with overwhelming strength, but about moving with them in a kind of architectural dance. This was engineering as a form of dialogue, a conversation between human creativity and planetary power. Their solutions emerged from a place of profound observation, patience, and a deep respect for the environment, qualities that speak to a wisdom far beyond mere technical skill. These timeless principles remind us that some of the most powerful answers are not invented, but discovered by paying close attention to the world around us. It's a lesson that echoes through the centuries, urging us to reconsider our own relationship with the planet. I encourage you to look at historical structures with new eyes from now on. When you see an ancient ruin or a centuries-old temple, don't just see old stones, see a library of knowledge, a testament to human adaptability. See the carefully interlocked blocks that could shift and settle, the hidden layers of gravel that acted as shock absorbers, the subtle inward lean that turned destructive force into stabilizing pressure. Appreciate the deep wisdom encoded in those stones, a wisdom born of generations watching, learning, and innovating. Each monument is a page in a universal story of survival. I'd love to hear which ancient technique impressed you the most in the comments below. Was it the sheer brilliance of the Japanese Shinbashira, acting as a giant pendulum, or the mind-bending precision of Inca polygonal masonry, where every stone was a unique piece of a vast, flexible puzzle? Perhaps it was the Roman use of self-healing concrete, a material that seems almost alive in its longevity. Let's continue this fascinating conversation. And if you've enjoyed this exploration into how our ancestors outsmarted earthquakes, be sure to subscribe for more deep dives into history's greatest mysteries. There are countless more enigmas waiting to be unraveled, and together we can uncover the lost wisdom that still has so much to teach us about building a safer, more